Wow, some really heavy stuff this time, this Hartford Distributors shooting August 3rd, 2010, Manchester, Connecticut.
Yeah.
And we're going to like dive into this whole thing, the events, what's supposedly led up to it, and the immediate aftermath, all from the material you sent over.
Right. And, this was a pretty significant event, I mean, in Connecticut history, sadly. It
Yeah.
all went down at a warehouse owned by Hartford Distributors. I think they were the ones distributing Budweiser products and wine in the area.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And at the center of this whole thing is Omar Sheriff Thornton, born in '76, a former employee there.
Okay, so just to lay it all out right up front, what we know from these sources is Thornton shot and killed 8 coworkers, and then himself injured 2 others. So we're talking a mass shooting, murder-suicide, and workplace shooting all in one.
Yeah, definitely.
And the weapons, kind of 2 9mm semi-automatic pistols,
Yeah.
a Ruger SR9, and a Ruger P95.
Right.
So let's try and trace this back. How did this even start? What happened?
Well, it looks like Thornton was called in by management for disciplinary reasons.
Okay.
And it seems this disciplinary action is because he was caught on camera stealing beer.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. And there was also some suspicion about him being involved in stealing empty beer kegs.
That's pretty serious for a beer distributor.
Yeah, exactly. They're a wholesaler for Budweiser, so I'm sure they take that kind of thing pretty seriously.
Absolutely. It's a huge breach of trust.
Yeah.
So what happened then?
Well, it seems they gave him the option to resign or be fired,
Right.
and she chose to resign.
Okay.
So at that point, they were escorting him out of the building, and that's when things took a very dark turn.
Oh.
Yeah, instead of just leaving, he pulls out these 2 9mm handguns from his lunchbox and just starts shooting.
Oh, my God.
There were like 40 employees there at the time.
Wow, that is terrifying to even think about. So what happened next? It must have been absolute pandemonium.
Yeah, it was all over really quickly. From what we gather in just a few minutes, 8 coworkers were dead, 2 others seriously injured.
God, what a nightmare. So what happened immediately after the shooting?
Well, the sources describe a pretty chaotic scene, lots of employees calling 911. Some of them were able to identify Thornton as the shooter, which obviously helped the police responding.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So how quickly did the police get there?
It seems they got there remarkably fast, like 3 minutes after the first 911 call.
Wow.
Then about 10 minutes later, they entered the building.
Okay, so where was Thornton at this point?
He was hiding out in a locked office.
Oh, wow. So what did he do then? Did he try to escape?
No, it seems he called his mother, explained what he'd done, and told her he was going to kill himself.
Oh, my God.
And then he actually called 911 himself.
Oh, he did? What did he say?
He claimed he did it because of racism at work.
What?
Yeah, and he said he regretted not killing more people.
Wow. That's a chilling thing to hear. Obviously, a very disturbed individual. But did the materials provide any more details on this racism claim?
Well, there's some conflicting information there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Thornton's family and his girlfriend Christy Hanna said he had complained about racial discrimination at Hartford Distributors.
Like what specifically?
They said he'd seen a picture of a noose and a racial slur written on a bathroom wall.
God, that's awful. But did anyone else corroborate these claims?
Well, that's where it gets tricky. The company union officials and some of the other workers there denied any racism.
So a very different perspective.
Yeah, and the union said Thornton never even filed a formal complaint.
That is interesting. So it seems like we're getting 2 very different sides of the story here.
Exactly, and it makes it really hard to know what to believe.
For sure. So back to Thornton, he shot himself after that 911 call, right?
Yeah, right after a tragic end to a horrific situation.
It really is. And the victims, I think it's important to say their names to remember them. These were real people with families and lives.
Absolutely, you're right. Their names were Edwin Kennison, he was 49, William Ackerman, 51, Brian Ciriliano, also 51, Craig Pepins, 60, Louis Felder, 50, Victor James, 61, Stephen Hollander, 50, and Jerome Rosenstein, who was 77.
It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And 2 others were wounded too, though the material doesn't name them.
Yeah.
So let's go back to this issue of racism for a second. The sources mention a forensic psychiatrist, Keith Ablow. What did he have to say?
Right. Dr. Ablow was pretty skeptical that name-calling or even seeing that image would lead someone to do something like this.
I can see that.
He figured there had to be more to it, maybe paranoia. And he brought up the fact that Thornton was being fired for stealing beer.
Right. So maybe the discipline was really the trigger, not necessarily racism at the company itself.
Yeah, that was his take.
So what did the police find out about these racism allegations when they investigated?
Well, they didn't find any evidence to support the claims of widespread racism at Hartford Distributors. And apparently they talked to other minority employees who didn't agree that it was a racist place.
Wow. So even more conflicting information.
It really is a complicated situation. There's Thornton's perspective, then you have the company, the union, other employees. It's hard to sort out.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's zoom out a bit now. What's the bigger picture here?
Well, this is a pretty significant event in Connecticut's history. It's considered the deadliest workplace shooting ever in the state and the second deadliest mass shooting overall. Only Sandy Hook was worse.
God, that's awful. I mean, what a terrible thing for the state to have gone through. And the material mentions another workplace shooting at the lottery headquarters in Newington back in '98. So it's not the first time Connecticut has experienced this kind of tragedy.
Yeah, unfortunately not.
So are there any other repercussions after the shooting besides, the obvious tragedy of it all?
Yeah, there were a couple of arrests. Christy Quayle and Sean Quayle were arrested for receiving stolen property allegedly taken by Thornton. And then Sean Quayle got himself in more trouble while reporters were covering the shooting. He sprayed them with bug spray.
Really? He sprayed reporters with bug spray.
Why? Who knows? He ended up with a whole bunch of charges. 3 counts of first-degree reckless endangerment, 3 counts of third-degree assault carrying a dangerous instrument, and breach of peace.
Wow, he must have really let loose with that bug spray.
Right.
What kind was it anyway?
They actually say in the material it was Spectricide wasp and hornet spray. And apparently the warning label says not to breathe it in or get the liquid on you. So, yeah, not something you want to be spraying at people.
Absolutely not.
Oh,
Okay,
fun.
so as we wrap up this deep dive, can we just go over the main points again?
Sure. So we had this really awful event. A former employee about to be fired for stealing commits a mass shooting, killing himself in the end. And his stated reason was racism at work.
Right, but then it gets murky because you have the company, the union, and other workers denying the racism. And Thornton never filed any complaint officially, and the police investigation didn't find anything to back it up either.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think.
It does. And of course, the most important thing to remember is the human cost. 8 people lost their lives. 2 were injured. Families were shattered. A community was traumatized. It's just a horrific reminder of how quickly things can go wrong, how fragile life is.
Yeah.
And I think what's really sticking with me is this whole idea of motive. We have this alleged racism, but also the undeniable theft. Was it one or the other? Was it a combination of both? Or was there something else entirely going on that we just don't know about?
It's hard to say.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes this case so disturbing and so thought-provoking, because it forces us to confront the fact that sometimes we may never truly understand what drives a person to commit such a terrible act.
Yeah.
And it also reminds us that these things aren't always black and white. There can be so many different factors at play: personal grievances, workplace dynamics, societal issues, and that sometimes it's just impossible to disentangle them all.
That's the truth.
It really is. So as always, we encourage you, our listeners, to think about these questions, to do your own research, and to come to your own conclusions. Because ultimately, there are no easy answers when it comes to understanding tragedy.
Nope.
But by grappling with these difficult questions, by trying to make sense of the senselessness, we can hopefully learn something from these terrible events and maybe even work towards preventing them from happening again.
Yeah, that's the hope.
It really is. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.